I was going to, I still may have to, there's so much information that we have now on events coming up, and just on the alien, extraterrestrial, and terrestrial thing itself is so much to cover. I had one other section I wanted to deal with on this, which would be tying it in for the reasons now for everything happening as it is. What I wanted to do is to segue and give you a little background on some of these creatures or folks or whatever you want to call that have been involved with people here on Earth for so long, and this whole issue has been skirted. That in itself is one program. Last week, of course, we gave the Midwest connection because we have some people here from Indiana and from St. Louis and all like that. So I don't know. We'll see how far it goes on this one. I still think it's best to divide that and bring, especially now that some information and pictures I want you to see you won't be able to see. But we'll have to go from there again. Either way, let's just start, if we can, with what we want to call the middle section, or what I call TEAs 2, Terrestrials, Extraterrestrials, and Aliens 2. And, all right? I want to say hello to all of you, and thank you for attending the Metacenter for our second in our series of what we call T's, and of course it's nothing to drink. That's terrestrial, extraterrestrial, and alien, and the agendas so from them. The point is that now as we move deeper into the Aquarian consciousness, into the cosmic age of Aquarius, if you would, we're finding that it's time to think. This is the time for the thinkers. This is the time for folks to begin to put things together and reach some kind of conclusions. And as you saw by the flyer, we feel that that time is one that is not only upon us, but we ought to get some kind of background on what is happening in general in order to be able to get more specific about events, weather control, mind control, and things that are happening that seemingly are unrelated. Almost anyone metaphysical now realizes that something is different, something is wrong, something is right. The wrongs, of course, are obvious. Everybody's getting sick, plagues are hitting, there's all kind of weather modification. We can't tell one season from the other. It just goes on and on. The things that are good that people are finally beginning to awaken, they're beginning to challenge, they're beginning to try to understand what is happening, and realizing that they have to spend more time with their own consciousness, that they have to do for self. And even though people are flocking to the hospitals, many people, of course, are taking the what we call homeopathic and naturopathic route. This is all in keeping with the times that we're in. It's one thing to be chemical, which they now use alchemical, L in chem being from chemet and chem, and being able to use things that are for chemical people. But when you're a biological person with some chemistry, you have to also go into natural things in order to keep yourself alive. Since there are different races here, different needs for those body types, to group everything that everybody should have this, everybody should have that, is one of our first mistakes. Different people, even though the souls may inhabit various bodies, when you're in a certain body, you need certain things for that body type to function. And you cannot take things that other people, and even though they may all have souls, we've covered that before, need for their body types. So we need to understand that very clearly and very closely. So I want to start off with a little bit of what would be called the racial connections. And I want to start off with the topic that most people don't hear enough about so-called Negroes, and about so-called people with melanin. That's what we call, archaeologically speaking and anthropologically speaking, the Negroids. I'm going to cover some areas here, and I'm going to also call on a person, Dr. Abraham, who happens to be here today too, which will also, he didn't know I was going to do this for him or with him, but I'm going to also call on him to share some things with you too. Let's go back first of all, since what isn't usually covered in these metaphysical texts and in the books that you hear on Art Bell and the writers, is what is a Negroid. There is no such thing, of course, as a Negro. Negro does not mean black per se. Negra was black. It has nothing to do with that. Negroid or Negro comes from a takeoff from the word Necro, N-E-C-R-O. And if you spell that out, N-E-C-R-O, and then you close at the end of the C, you get a G, Negro. Negro is the dead, the unknowing, the lost, the people who do not know who they are. Negro means necrophil, necrophilia, places of the dead, places of the lost, the city of this and that. It is a made-up word that actually has some context because it means people lost in consciousness. People who are dead. Dead on a planet that gives life. Dead to whom they don't know and who they do know. When we're looking again at Negroids, and I'll start off with that per se, you're talking about a very ancient people that have one thing in common with lots of other people in the galaxy, seemingly in the cosmos, and that is melanin. Melanin is the key for everything on this planet, and it's the thing that separates racial types and body types now. Melanin is a gift from the gods. Now the point is, when you say gods, what are you talking about? You mean a gift from the Lord, as many Christians would say, or if you're Buddhist or if you're Islamic, I don't even want to go into that part. But what you're looking at when you say gods, you're talking about people in different dimensions, people much smarter, people around a little bit longer in body types, that have come into certain areas in this universe. Not so much in the cosmos. When you say cosmos, you're talking about the whole conglomeration. But you have almost what is now called 7 different universes, not just one. And in this universe, there's been a domination with people who have come in to practice godship. Now, godship can be either feminine or masculine. Prefer to say God is God, we can say that too. But in many cases, these people are non-sexual. They have come here on what is called the 9th and 10th dimension. They have no physical bodies. There are not too many physical planets, except in this particular universe anyway. Most planets do not take on physical substances. That's what we've been told before, but in research it seems to be the best way to put it. And this particular planet Earth was a homemade place. It was a place many have called Nibiru. I argue that sometimes too, but I'm familiar with the story of it again. It's a place that a lot of scientists from 4 different systems, the Pleiades, again what is called again the Sirius or the Sirian group again, Canis Major, Canis Minor, people from Procyon, and people from Halcyon, all got together to put 22 planets like this together at one time in different universes to see what could be done if everything you could think of had a chance to come together. This is why the planet Earth is so diverse. This is why the planet Earth is so, beautiful. You have extremes of climate, or had it. The climates are becoming one. You can all begin to see that, and that will happen supposedly by 2012. But you have here ice in beautiful formations of ice. You have snow that goes along with it. You have tropical rain. We have tropical places again that are very arid, if you would, and even rainforests. We have deserts here again, and we have plains. Every type of climate you can think of, you can actually be born into or travel into. And as you travel to these places on our Earth, it's just like you're traveling to other planets. Because some planets have only one season all the time. Only one tropical plain. Only one desert. They are planets that do not have all the amalgamations that we have here. This was a well thought out thing. The reason why things here are so complex is because you have so many different kind of thoughts at work here. This was an amalgamation to see what would happen if all different creatures from different places could be brought together with their own kind of climate, and then to see if they could evolve whatever species won out to reach a height to get back to what would be called the universal prime creator. Now, I use that term simply because it says universal, which means the vast. It's prime meaning first. And in creator meaning creator of, creatus, causing to come forth from. So here you have everything. And as we have seen, these everythings can't seem to get along for too long. And there's a reason for that, because there were also 2 other subgroups that didn't like the idea that all of these amalgamated species or universes or people could come together to create 22 that they didn't have any part of. And so therefore they became like invaders. They began people to try and see if they could usurp. Their creatures have been many. Named Lucifer, supposedly the fallen one. We've had Anu, supposedly from the Anunnaki, the ones that fell from the sky. They've had all kind of different stories that have gotten jumbled up. And then they gave a book, which was not intended for everybody on this planet, which they called the Bible, which was a usurpation of other books that were given. And some were not even given books because it was not necessary for them to read. They were communicated with telepathically. Yet we now have taken and brought up what is called religions. And as we stated before in metaphysics, and I'm very sorry, we're stepping on a lot of toes, I'm sure today, but it's not the first time. If you need a religion, then you don't need a soul. Religion is for the soulless as a training guide to tell you what to do and what not to do. When you're born with the soul, you're born with a spirituality that needs no religion. It means that you're born understanding the rights and wrongs, and all you have to do is on the lowest plane of all, the physical plane, prove what you know. This is not reality, and the movies are trying to tell you this is not real. And if it was real, you would never have to sleep. You sleep because it is so unreal that you must get back to reality, which is a dreamlike state, in order to wake up to keep the physical plane intact. This is why the physical body degenerates, ages, and you die. It doesn't mean that you ever die. It means that that physical body wears out. And it wears out in a short space of time, less than 100 years in most cases. Or really, when it's serviceable, sometimes by 60. So I'm saying to you, if you doubt that, ask yourself, why do you have to sleep? No matter how much you eat, no matter how much you pray, no matter how much you do anything, you must do what? Sleep. And if you don't sleep every 72 hours, you will die. You will sleep standing up, you will sleep driving a car, you will sleep flying a plane, you will sleep. Because you need to energize the physical body with a substance that you cannot get from anything you eat or anything else. It is pure thought. And if you understand, many people take poisons. But when they elevate their thoughts, they don't die. Other people who don't even understand how thoughts can alter frequencies take poisons and they do die. People are rolling around eating glass light bulbs, things like this, and they are able to do so. You say, well, what's the difference? They might be what would be called a cyclic clone. They look like you, but they're not like you. Internally, there's so much difference, as you say. In many cases, physiognomists and people who study the human body, when they cut open some people, they are amazed by what they say. That doesn't make the reference, what they see. They don't have all the organs in place at the places we think of. We are a complex organization here. We are a species here so intermixed that we are just beginning to catch on to what's happening. And as we catch on, they're trying to knock us out. So let's go back again to looking at some not so ancient terms, but terms that we must think of as places in order to get to the hub of what I want to bring you to. We have what is called Greece. We're told here under a certain group of people that Greece, again, was the precursor again of Rome, and that the Roman and Grecian empires were the biggest ever seen. Well, when we understand one thing, ancient Greece, which goes back past Rome and so on like this, was called Ionia. The Ionians were a Negroid-looking people. Now, anything that came after the Ionians were misplaced or implaced, or travelers who came to a land that were not the indigenous people of that land, but people whose history now, a very brief one, we've been indoctrinated with. There are reasons for all of that. When we look at what would be called Romans, and we look at the Pope, and we look at the Vatican, and we understand that there was in the tip of Italy there Sicilians, and that they were different from the upgrade Romans, and that they fought each other, and so on again like this. We'll understand that the more ancient name for Italy was Etrusca. The Etruscans were Negroid looking. Using again their terminology. But you don't hear anything about Etrusca too much again. When you go again to in the land of what would be now called Africa, there's no such place called Africa in ancient history. You cannot study ancient history and look for Africa, because Africa doesn't exist. If you notice, all of these continents now are named with the letter A and end with the letter A, except for one, Europe, which is not a continent. But they now told you there's 7 continents. So you see, all these lies are very hard when you go searching, because you're searching for something that doesn't exist. Let's just say that this matrix in physical is reality. So let's just look at the reality of something that doesn't have reality. Let's make something out of nothing. Let's go back now to Ethiopia. Well, when we find Ethiopia, you find that Ethiopia's ancient name was Judah. You talk about the Lion of Judah, Haile Selassie, well, this is what they were talking about. But they've changed all of this. So you can't even do research correctly now, and people get arguing over superfluous childlike things, which even has no beginning other than the Roman, Greco-Roman culture. Romulus and Remus. The same kind of thing, and they started from what? Romulus and Remus. Where were they born from? You better remember.
Lion cubs.
Where? Wolves. Wolves. Dogs. Okay. This is what they tell you, the start of Rome. Well, all of these are allegorical. You have to begin to look past this foolishness. Even his story, the finally got peeped. They say, well, his story is his story. But if I'm Negroid, my story is a mis-story. Okay? Well, that's exactly what is happening. The terms. You're given the devil. When you spell the devil backwards, what do you get?
Life.
Life. And when you spell lives backwards, what do you get? Devil.
Yeah.
It's a backward way of living, which leads you to the devil. When you have to go with books and rather than going into consciousness. So I'm just trying to show you the words are all around. But nobody wants to talk about them. Why? Because you don't get paid well when you do that. You might get assassinated when you do that. Because you're waking up a soul which is so powerful that if it understands what it's in and what it's doing, the whole matrix, as they tried to show you, the whole maze comes falling down. You're the most feared people in the universe, this particular universe. Because the souls that you are in and the bodies that those souls came into got locked into the lowest vibrational rate possible, that of an animal, on a physical planet that had 22, 21 other kind of animals and mixtures and clones and cyborgs and you name it. And I'll go into each of those with you before we start today. There's what is called the Tausatian connection when you're using the word Negroids. They were influenced greatly, if you're in a Negroid type body, by what is called the star-sun system Sirius. They are the ones that influence you the most, and let's stay at the very beginning. They are the highest dimension, 9th or 10th dimension, type of intelligence in this whole part of our universe. Everybody else comes under the Sirius. The Sirius again, and I'll go into that a little bit too to give a background. There is what are called 3 suns in Sirius. Most of it just says Sirius. Sirius A is in the constellation of what is called Canis Major, the big dog. They're supposed to be about 8.7 light years away. Well, whatever that means again, 183,000 miles a second, a light year. So anyway, about 8.7 light years away. Sirius B, which is what is called white dwarf. It's a star that is supposedly nearing the end of its beam, much like our star is soon to be, if you would. Has again what is called a light that is 100,000 times fainter than Sirius A. That's why it wasn't seen for the longest. Arthur Clarke, and so they're talking about they finally discovered Sirius B. Sirius B is a very faint star, but it is the one that has planets around it. Sirius A has no planets. Sirius A, like Procyon and Alcyon, begins to control sun systems. And there are actually beings that are born on suns and on sun systems. One of the Orientals and the Japanese, and so were the last ones to be born on suns. That's why their eyes are so slatted. This is why even when their souls came into these bodies, they had to still search again for a bright light, if you would. But that's another thing then too. The Dogons of Africa, to kind of jump just a little bit around, since again they're ones that live in Mali, in the mountains there, if you would, stated that their ancestors either came from, were part of, or were influenced by beings from Sirius. They were talking about Sirius B, not Sirius A. Keep in mind, Sirius A controls sun systems. Sirius B as in more amphibian, or a crossbreed of prototype people who both live in water and in air. And Sirius C is almost like an insect-like kingdom, if you would. But they found one thing in common, they got together, if you would. The Dogons, as they're called, were stated that they were influenced by the Nomos from the star system called Sirius. Nomo is N-O-M-M-O. And they stated that these Nomos would teach them mainly in the evening. And if they saw them in the day, they had to go to the cave. That's one of the reasons why they lived in the mountains with these caves, because these beings could not take a lot of sun and heat. But they stated that there were ancestors of them that could. They went there to these people and they were taught telepathically. This is why you'll find in most of Kemet, the people there didn't do a lot of scribing and writing. The scribes were elitists who put down on the physical plane in pictographs, vertical columns, things that you're supposed to know. They now call it again picture writing, if you would. They didn't write linear with things like this, no, because they used telepathy. And when you use telepathy, you don't have to write things down. We have been taught to write things down, to read things, and yet it comes very hard to people. But if you can begin to picture things, if you can begin to sense and look at people, you can become telepathic somewhat, because you can begin to pick up what that person is thinking by the actions, by the looks, and all throughout the area of Kemet. This is what people have tried to do. They didn't do a lot of writing. They said, well, why are there no parchments? And so there was no need for it. They tuned in the universal mind. They were able to go into the soul, bodies, and sense. And then they conveyed back and forth by thoughts. People who do a lot of talking, people who do a lot of writing, are people who have lost the sixth sense. They're people who must communicate in the best way they can is by written words, scribed words. Now, I'm not saying now that you shouldn't do this. I'm simply saying you can understand now why a lot of history was not written. And they used, again, people that they called griots, people who had excellent memories. Well, all of us would have excellent memories if we used our brains and minds. But we can't if we have to write everything down. We say now, if it's not written down, we can't remember it. And if we can't remember it, we forget it. You cannot forget anything that's inscribed on the matrix of the brain. It's just that you don't know how to locate it. So what are they telling you now to do? They're teaching you now to take a picture of something that you can't forget. If it's a sexual object, if it's something you love to eat, if it's something you want to have, and you tie certain thoughts to that picture, and you file it away in the neurons of your brain. Then when you see the picture, it tags itself to the thought. It's just like you use a computer. You go back and you get the picture, and then it comes revealed back. More and more we're told less and less to use our brains. Then they come and they say we use less than 1/10 of 1% of our brain. I don't know if we use any of our brain. But we're beginning to, because the very thing that the brain is supposed to do, we know. When you go to a computer, you look up one word, but you have to know the key word. Once you look up the word, everything starts unfolding. That's the way people were taught. They were told things that they couldn't forget. And then the stories with them followed on. Now we take everything as absolute proof, supposedly. Only if it's not written down, and so it cannot exist. To give you an example, the Uri tribe, it's near Dahomey in Africa again, have had ancestors who have had long tails. They're scaly tails. They look more or less like an amphibian tail, if you would. They've had snouts, if you would, there too. And collectively, they had a god that they worship, a deity by the name of Eniweho, something along that line, Eniweho. This, along with many other gods that people have had, interestingly enough, turns out to be a kind of either a cetacean, a creature like a mammalian, or a serpent again. Let me give you some examples for that again. In Sumer, many people like to refer back to the Sumerians and so. They had as a chief figure in their history Oannes. Oannes, and that's spelled O-A-N-N-E-S. Oannes, you find out again, was a half-gilled, upright walking creature that could live in the water or on land. Right? You had Eniweho, which we just talked about again. In North Africa, there's a lake called Lake Triton. And if you go back, you'll find out that Triton and the creature that came out of Triton, which is named after him, said his name was Triton, was also a gilled person. Upright walking, 7 to 8 feet tall, had gills. Also, again, could speak telepathically, not with a spoken word, and seemingly was very intelligent and influenced the people there in North Africa around Lake Triton. When you go to the Mediterranean area, you go to what is called the Aegean Sea. They have a place in there that's called Nerio. Nerio was, again, a guild-type person, half creature that walked upright again, and influenced the people around that area. Directly in the Mediterranean Sea, you had what is called Artemis. Artemis was a mermaid, a half-fish, half-person who did not come out of the water, but would sit on barks and so, in ships and boats, and talk to the people because she could not walk upright. She actually had still. The lower half of her body was like a fin or a fish. Now, it's interesting that all of these stories come from various parts of that area that is now called the Near East, which of course had been known to us, or should be known to us as Kemet, not our Cuba land and not Africa, Kemet. And understand at one time when these people began to speak, they did not speak in vowels. They spoke in consonants. Yeah? As much as the ancient Hebrew was in consonants. They didn't want to know who the Hebrew people. Understand again, it was not necessary to get linear letters, to get a word, to get sentences and structure and syntax. That's not necessary unless you're using a tongue. And many of the people who taught these people did not have a cleft tongue. They didn't have a solid tongue. The tongue was forked. And if you know, there's still a saying amongst the American native here, the Native American, persons speak with forked tongue, which led to hissing sounds. You couldn't form vowels with the forked tongue. So you either did it telepathically, or you had a whole different language and a whole different set of pictures. They have said one picture, what, worth 1,000 words. Same thing with the brain. When you start to use pictures, you begin to awaken the part of the dormant portion of your brain. When you use letters and words, you can never awaken that, because it takes too many words, with too many letters. One picture, whole sentences, whole things that happen. When you dream, and many people, of course, did not have a lot of conversations in dreams. They had pictures in dreams. Now you're awakening the thought mind. This is why you can go so far and do so much in the dream world, if you would. I want to go to kind of break down and explain, and there seemingly are just thousands of different kinds of races in our cosmos. But I want to deal with just a few. I start off with the chief one, probably the progenitor of all, and that is the Syrian. Syrians are generally, and again we're talking about from Sirius B and Sirius C, not Sirius A. Sirius A rules sun systems. Sirius B as a creature or a person or a thing, or whatever you would, 4.5 to 6.5 feet tall, usually an amphibian. And also on Sirius B there is a moon from which many of the people that we refer to now as the Olmecs came from. The Olmecs, and they stopped the history of the Olmecs by misusing what we call the word Mayan here. Anytime you say Mayan, you mean Olmec. That is the prejudiced anthropologist or ignorantly taught anthropologist word for Olmec. Why? Because the Olmecs, if you ever seen the pictures of them, look completely Negro. And they were found everywhere in the Western Hemisphere. They were found not only in South America, but in North America. They were found in Canada. They were found in big barges and things that have been found on the sea. They've been found in picture writing, in caves under the ocean. Olmecs were everywhere. And they were the people there, the most ancient people that you can usually find here, and still call them human, meaning they have truncation, arms, bipedal, this kind of thing. They were called Olmecs. Anything Mayan is a lie. It simply is something that had to be brought about. So rather than say Olmec, which everybody knows is Negroid, and in fact, some of the books used to say that they didn't classify or like to give too much credit to the Olmecs because they worshiped deformed babies. Now, what this had to do with anything, I don't know, but that's one of the things that they say in archaeology. Well, the reason why they say they worship deformed babies was because many of the pictures of the Olmecian baby had a cleft in the head and like a diamond up here by what we would now call the middle forehead, like many of the Islamic people now put the dot up there. Yeah. It simply meant that these people were very frontal-lobed, and yet they also had long heads, which meant that they were very psychic. And their babies, of course, were able to do things. They could move objects in birth. They could levitate things. They were very psychic, if you would, very spiritual people. So they don't like to deal with hardly any of that. But at any rate, when you're talking about Sirius, you're talking mainly about B and C. There are 3 sons at least. There may be more, but 3 sons that I've been able to do research on. And all this research comes very hard. And that is B and C. A rules people on the 12th, 13th dimension, sun people. B and C have people who live on planets that go around suns. This is why they can definitely say to you, there is nothing new under the sun. Because until you graduate through the sun that your planet is around, you haven't evolved. You're still physical or dimensional. You can't go to the 9th and 10th dimension and become a sun person. Sons of the sun are people who come out of their bodies, go wherever they want to, take on that body type for a while, and go on. They are mental people, having nothing to do with the physical plane. There is another group that is called Orion. And if you notice in most of Kemetic history, and I'll stop using the word Africa, stay with me, most of Kemetic history, when you see it again, you'll find that the Egyptians, who were looked upon, especially around the 18th dynasty, as almost alchemists, alchemy, they were people again who, with the pyramid, one shaft, or they call it breathing holes or air holes, I don't know what they call, but this is what they use. One points toward Sirius, the other points toward Orion. Sirius has been known again as the dog star because it's in Canis Major and Canis Minor. Orion has been known as a hunter. Orion and creatures and Pleiadians and so that come from there are hunters. In fact, well, we'll get into the Pleiadians a little bit later on then too. The dog stars has been said as a companion to man and mankind. It's said that the only ones who took a lot of time with the creatures that were here were the people from Canis Major and Minor. Well, that's fitting, because they were one of the four that started the planet Earth in the first place, who constructed the planet Earth, and as well should. The deceivers, of course, well, let me move on and still talk again about what we were calling out the Pleiadians. The Pleiadians seems to have brought forth at this time three different kinds of people. Since the Pleiadians are in Orion, again, you'll find that in the Pleiades, you have what is called the blondes. This is usually what most of the Caucasian people like to refer to. Why? Because in the Netherlands and in the Baltic area, you have blonde people. Blonde is an absence of melanin. It means that the hair has turned light. It cannot hold pigmentation. Just like a very pale skin cannot hold pigmentation. Now, when a soul comes into this body, there are certain things for it to learn, and it has to be on a certain part of the planet. Because being pale-skinned, they cannot live where there's a lot of sun, and they did not take a lot of chlorophyll, because what does chlorophyll do? Chlorophyll is what human hemoglobin is made up of mainly. Chlorophyll is the closest thing to human hemoglobin. So you have more or less a very clear, almost translucent type blood in people from the Netherlands and people that are very pale. And this is what has come to be known as blue bloods. Blue bloods meant that the veins were so close to the skin and the skin had no pigmentation that you could see the veins and things that carry the blood. You could see that there was blue blood. Now, blood itself in many cases, until it oxidizes, has no color. It is just plasma. Its color comes when it mixes with any and some of the ingredients in the air of the except for one people. People with melanin, blood can actually be red in the vein, sometimes even a kind of a green in the vein, and sometimes orange in the vein, depending on the amount of oxygen or nitrogen or helium in that setup. But people with very pale skins can only have blue bloods because it is the only thing that their lack of melanin presents. Now, they're gifts to all races. They're goods and bads and benefits and taken ways, if you would, from it. They came about, the Pleiadian people, about 26,000 years ago. And they came to influence a certain portion of the planet by which their ancestry and their future now rest. Without these people awakening, these other ancestors could not go forth. They are time travelers, but they're new time travelers. Anybody that has a soul is automatically a time traveler. Why? Because the soul has no proximity, has no physical substance, but it gets locked into physical substance for an experience. In a melanated body, they're able to stay both on one side and the other a little bit easier. In a non-melanated body, it's very hard to transit. It's very hard to time travel. Each of you are time travelers because you time travel every time you go to sleep. Bring it up in the Q&A if you want. If you go to me, you want to know what time travel you are? You're looking at one when you look in the mirror. And sometimes, as I used to teach in classes on magic, you can look in that mirror and see your face change and see your soul shine through. If any of you ever took my old classes, you can. This is why mirrors are very precious things and very interesting things for you to know. There is also what is called, again, and Pleiadians, and keep in mind, Pleiadians are deceivers. They play games. They will be whatever you want them to be. They will say whatever you want them to say. They will do anything they can to try and get next to you because they need your substance. They need the energy substance. And this is not just true of Negroids. This is true of any race of people on the planet Earth. They have what they call Zeta Reticulans. Zeta Reticulans, of course, are from Zeta Reticulans, which is in Orion again. And their structure comes different ways. They've got about 18 different planets in Zeta Reticuli. Part of their group, again, is a 7-8 foot tall gray kind of a person. All you hear about nowadays are the little grays. Well, there's also big grays. The big grays also had hooked noses. The hooked nose grays are the ones that the 13th tribe ran into. And that's where you get the big bulbous noses again, people who now call themselves Jewish, if you will. You think of Jewish as a religion. but yet they talk of themselves as a race. Now, can't be both. Is it a religion or is it a race? Truth was that one of the so-called tribes, the one that got lost, went into the mountains of the Caucasus. They came into some of these people from Zeta Reticuli who lived inside the earth. They transformed them, genetically altered them, gave them a certain kind of consciousness where they could go on and report back to them again. And you can always tell the type there now because they have the great big bulbous noses. Much like usually sometimes with the warlord. It shows this genetic mutation right there, if you understand that. Now, again, what they're going to state when this is why I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this tape or not, I will become a racist. I will become a Jew hater. I can't hate myself because I'm a Semite in this body. So how can I be a hater of that? But what is happening is I'm teaching you metaphysics. Metaphysics transcends historical racial history here and begins to let you understand what races really are on this planet. So understand how I'm giving it. I know it's going to get twisted later. Understand how I'm presenting it. You heard it presented correctly, not how you will hear it a year from now when the tape comes out if I allow it to be released. I just want to put it all together in your own minds so that you can research it, meditate on it, and see if you can find some truths which will explain a lot of things now that are going to get very curious as we go into this new Aquarian age. These people, when they were finally set back on the surface, having been altered, now had a God that they reported back to, which was again a, if you want to call it extraterrestrial, if you would, now taught them, gave them certain symbols and books of magic and sounding devices by which they could report back. Much like we now use what we would call, what do you call these little things? We put the computer, put the chip on now, these little talking devices. Cell phones, okay? Well, they had like cell phones, only they were amulets and things. They could talk into the amulet, contact the person in the underworld, or they could get codes given to them like this, and they had devices. From these devices, when they worked, where they could contact the gods, comes a history of Arks of the Covenant, of certain scepters and things by which you could contact a higher dimension. Well, if you couldn't contact it by coming out of your body, because your soul wasn't high enough, then you had to do it with the device. So you phoned them. The movie, E.T. Phone Home, tries to show you all times. People use different devices to contact the beings that have had the most influence, and they were trained to do this. Because these beings, these gods, if you would, were very covetous. They help make you, they help alter you, they want you to report back to them. It even states in the biblical terms for those, thou shalt have no other God beside me. Well, what other God could there be? Many. And some of them got influenced, and sometimes they said, hey, my God's better than your God. And they had wars over the gods. And even the gods, who were nothing more than advanced beings, advanced to us from other planets, who warred and fought over the creations of Earth, who warred and fought over the Earth itself. And we read these, the wars, in fact, when you look at Zechariah Sitchin's Sumner works, the wars of gods and men, the wars of the gods. Well, this is it. A god, any person now that is aboriginal and tribal and has not gone through the institutes of learning now would see some of the science in the laboratories and call it magic. Forgetting that they have their own magic, they'd be astounded by what the laboratory scientists can do. They can now even make weather, thanks to the gods. But I'm simply saying, do you begin to see what I'm trying to teach as I'm going through this? All right, there's another group. The little grays, of course, are a subspecies of the big hook-nosed grays. The grays are like a genetically altered, radiation-prone being that seems to be throughout the galaxy. When certain races fall low enough due to radiation, they become like the little grays. Pale, cannot hold anything, cannot eat anything, have no digestive organ, and yet they are not godlike enough to be able to float around outside of their bodies with souls. These are the things that created from atomic wars, from radiation poisonings and all like this. The little grays, if you would. The prototype, the hook-nosed grays, actually had sex organs. The little grays have no sex organ, internally only. The big ones, again, could actually breathe and could adapt to different atmospheres. The little ones can't. They have to be mutated. And in many cases, they're actually what you would call not only clones, but artificials. Things that have been made in laboratories by other species to do their little biddings like little robots and so on like that. There are people that are called the Iargans, I-A-R-G-A-N-S. Iarga, the planet Iarga, is from one of the suns in Alpha Centauri. They're usually very benign. They look more or less like you would call a horse. Closest way I can explain it now, they look like an up. Now all of these are bipedal. They're upright walking horses. Beautiful shaped, very psychic. They use craft, and they have come here from time to time. They were interested, of course, in the equestrian species, because the equestrian species looked a lot like them. That's another one that from time to time was here. People said that they saw horse-looking creatures, so you laugh. There are so many creatures and so many intelligences in this universe, I would laugh at nothing. In fact, all I do is look in amazement when people think that the Earth will rotate, everything around it rotates around the Earth, and then nothing else exists, and no other intelligent life can exist anywhere. There are what they call Acartians. Acartians. They're from what is called Andromeda, from one of the suns in Andromeda. They are generally referred to as screeds by many. They're upright walking insects, if you will. Some 10 and 12 foot tall. These screeds, if you would, in many cases, their highest species is pure gold. It says gold luminescence around it. Its skin and scales or organs and thorax and so are golds. And they, again, are very telepathic, can communicate with the insect kingdom, can communicate with higher kingdoms and all too, and they are like the rulers or the gods of the insect kingdom. Again, they're called Acartians. They're what they call Iridians. Iridians, again. These were many of the things that we now call the Anunnaki, the ones that were miners and used gases and petroleum. What they did was to convert some of the earth elements into a gas that was needed for their spaceships, and then later on needed for some of the breathing apparatus that they had. They're the ones also that led to the mutation and crossing of species down here, where they made like ape men, where they again took a hairy ape type creature and made out from it again, of course, Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon. Neanderthal man, of course, was one of the ape-like creatures which they worked with and took the hair off of and began to crossbreed them with some of their own seed. Their own women were very small. They had a male and female with external organs, but they could not do the mining and stuff. And if you read some of Zechariah Sitchin's books, I think his interpretation of that is correct. At least I agree with that part. But they were not the only ones that did this. But again, you're talking now about the Anunnaki, those who fell from the sky, and you're talking about those people who came from Iridians again. They have what they call Rigelians, R-I-G-E-L-I-A-N-S, Rigelians. They have both blondes there, they have grays there, and they have a type of a cat creature, if you would. Many of the stories about the cat goddesses, and so are people who came from the planets or the suns there in Regalia, if you would. Many of the Orientals had a stay in body type on Regalia, but they also had a stay on a planet inside of Mercury, which orbits the sun. Now, they tell you again, of course, that gets really way off because they tell you that there are 9 planets in our solar system. Supposedly there are 12 planets in this system. One is an intermercular one is outside the orbit of Pluto, and there are others. They have various names. I won't even try to bother to go into that for right now. But in any case, it means that a lot of the stuff, or so-called history or physics and the astronomy we taught, is based on science that is kind of shaky. They make any altered science, especially metaphysical science, they say is shaky. But if you go back again to the science that they study, which is called astronomy, you found that it spins off of what? Astrology. There was no astronomer before there was an astrologer. And then once they begin to classify, and they begin to be taught by some of these people from other places, then they begin to expand their consciousness and try to understand the universe, but the universe in a very unbeautiful way, a way that they created based on aliens influencing them, and now they call it an exact science, and they now say astrology is not a science. It's interesting that even though they call astrology a non-science, in many cases astrology does have its pitfalls, because that's been also bastardized. You will still find presidents using astrology and not astronomy. You will find advisors, Vizars, this is where we get a word advisor, Vizar, Imhotep, and so used astrology, not astronomy, because they had to understand the energy that came from the stars, not the stars themselves. Because the energy is what the creatures, if intelligent, rose to get to Earth, used as mental projection to get to Earth. So if you didn't understand that, you couldn't understand what was perturbating on what particular planet or what particular star sun system. This is why it was very important, because they understood that energy fields, electromagnetic fields, were the important things, not the physical, geological things called a planet. The stars always influence the planets. The planets do not influence the stars per se, unless they group together, if you will. There's another group called the Caucasians. They're generally 6 foot to 6.5 foot tall. They come in like an orange color, if you would. Now, there are a lot of planets in the system of Caucasians, but the particular one that I did research on was the 4th planet around the star Caucasians. It's a binary star-sun system also, so it means again that its influence is double the influence of any single one like we have, a unary system. A binary system always excels a unary system because the suns double themselves and constantly get to infinity and they last much longer, if you would. They're generally about 11.4 light years around. The suns there are yellow and yellowish white, and many of the creatures there are yellowish and yellowish white. The main form was an orange. The orange, of course, looked more or less like a cross between a cat and a crocodile. I don't know how best to explain it. But again, you must understand the body types like you see in Star Trek and all of Star Wars. So many body types you couldn't even begin to explain it. When I get to the end of all this to show you what they've also made since they came here, you really see what I'm talking about, body types. Forget the body. We had too much emphasis on the physical body here, which we stay in for only 100 years at the most, and think we've really done something. It's not the body type. It is the consciousness behind the body type. That's why they say if you look in the eyes and the eyes are dull, you have no soul in there. You look in the eyes and the eyes sparkle, whether it's a dog or a cat, whatever, it shows that you have intelligence, you have the light from the universal creator shining behind it. In many cases now, we can already see many of the creatures of Earth, the pets of Earth, are outstanding the people in consciousness and spirituality. They are more benevolent, more understanding, and more telepathic than we are. Now, always talk with me before you laugh. You never see dogs walking around barking at each other unless they're fixing a fight. Dogs sit and look at each other. I've had them for a long time, and then they go and they do. They've already telepathically communicated. They try to telepathically communicate with us. We're too dumb to understand that unless you're a pet lover. Cats do the same thing. In fact, they just look away. They've given up on us a long time. They spend half their time seeing what we have to go to sleep to see and then deny that it ever happened. They see the shadow people and the shadow worlds. They understand dimensions, and their eyes will adjust to the dimensional frequency so they can see it. Our eyes can't adjust anymore like that. And like with me, with the glasses wearing, because at one time I could see interdimensionally. My mother didn't understand that, so the consequence, I had to get glasses so I could see. When I got glasses, I couldn't see anymore. Anything. Then I have to get myopia, so occasionally, as I told you, I was back there, it got me so bad I was supposed to go blind. But what happened was, I saw without seeing through the eyes. And what do these things do here? They test your eyes. You cannot test your eyes. You have to test the light frequency or radiation energy on the optic thalamus nerve in order to understand what you're able to see. So when you're born with a psychic gift, they correct it. When they correct it, you have no psychic gift. They've been correcting everything here on this planet. Through the foods that you eat, through the ways that you're taught, everything to stop you from being dimensional. To stop you from being a time traveler. Then you go and you study how to build a time machine when you were born, a time machine. Again, I guess I'm losing something. When we move on to the race of people called Caucasians, if you would, which we now say white people. Again, you're talking about people from the Caucasus. Understand again, that's a big joke. I will start with just plain basic history. In 1705, the anthropologist Blumenbach had a group of skulls that he found on the dig, financed by very rich white people, if you would. And he looked at the most beautiful skulls that he had there, and as he was writing his notes and things, which they have to do to show the person how you spent their money and why you spend so much time. You have to get an accounting for the time you spend for the research project you did. He saw one particular skull that seemed wonderfully convoluted. It was very smooth, had a nice frontal lobe, a nice shape, and it says from the Mount Caucasus in the Georgia Asiatic Russia. Based on that, he formed the word Caucasus and Caucasoid, and that the skull must have been, since his people were so rich and he had seen so many people that were supposed to be aboriginally poor in consciousness and in money, he said, this must be the way my people's skull must look. So he said, since it was found in Georgia Asiatic Russia, which normally should have been Mongoloid, or Mongolian if you would, he stated again that these were the people of the Caucasus and formed the word Caucasian. So, now we say Caucasian means white. This is all stupid. It's all foolishness. It's lucid. I mean, what am I trying to say? Anyway, it's
Arbitrary.
arbitrary, it's an argument word, but again, it's just ridiculous. It's the best thing I can say. That skull could have been of an ape. That skull could have been of an alien. That skull could have been on what? Extraterrestrial. He didn't know what the skull from. All he knew it was from a dig site in the Caucasus Range on Georgia Mount in Asiatic Russia. And when he brought it down, he said, it must be the way my skull, my people look. We adapted that, and that's real scientific. Very scientific. So we get a whole race of people called Caucasoids. But the Scandinavian, Netherlandic, Baltic type person that you're talking about is a people generally influenced by the Pleiadians, new to Earth, very much so. Some were cast up out of what is called the inner Earth, and that's where I'm going to get into when we go into the Giza plateau mysteries. That'll be near the end of this too. But these are people that came from the inner Earth, people that were altered, genetically mutated by Pleiadians, and by people, and also those of the Anunnaki, people that were crossed again with apes, if you would, and hybridated, and a people again who had a very hard time adapting. But since they had one form of their race, which they now call Jewish people, who had come into the higher gods in the inner world and were given books and a way to phone home all the time, they now were led by these people, and when these people, although they looked somewhat like them, because they had the pale skins without the melanin, they were the same race, if you want to call it that, but they were of a different authority. They had a different god. And so they have had conflicts with one of their own, if you would, for a long time. The Pleiadians are the ones that most had influence upon these people over the last 26,000 years. The ones before that time were killed off in floods, the actual people there. And if you go back, and again, if you say, well, this is really way out, you go back to the beginnings of any of the continents here, and you go back to any of the races on this planet Earth, you don't have to go back really, but roughly around 5,000 years BC, and in many cases, 500 years BC. And you will find only one race of people living on the surface of Earth. One race, Negritos, little black dwarves. And that, whether you're going into what they would call now, what would be called the Mongolian society, the Mongoloids, the people again who they now call Orientals. Orientals and Orientalis is much different from the word Mongoloid. It means that people now that we say are either slant-eyed, usually short, light complected, straight or wavy hair, and so on and so forth. All of that is a big lie. The people, both the Chinese and the Japanese in many cases, worship Buddha. You find no straight-haired Buddha. All Buddhas look like Olmecs. When they came here and were cast out of the inner earth, and when they came from the inner mercurial place, they found these ruling Olmecs all over the place, and they worshipped them. They had babies with them by them. And I'll go back to another fundamental truth, which is going to sound very strange to you. The Huangpu Valley in China is one of the areas where you had your original so-called Asiatic, Oriental. They were Negritos, little black dwarfs, who intermixtured with some of these other people and brought you these other races. When they say Japanese, they came from the Ryukyu Islands off the coast of Japan. They refer to them as Ainus, and anytime they do this, start your research. When you start looking at the encyclopedia, so they refer to them as white from the Ainu Ryukyu Islands. Anytime they say they're white, start looking, because you don't start off your sentence saying this is a white person. You start off your sentence saying the origin of these people, where they came from, and then maybe what they look like. The Ainus were not white. The Ainus were from the Ryukyu Islands. They were Negritos, which means, again, they had melanin, they were short, they were dwarf. The people there are still very short. They're just beginning to get tall now when they've intermixed with Caucasoids. Again, with the people, again, who have a different bloodline and so on like that. And to prove to you again, they still worship Buddha. And if you notice, I have outside in the courtyard when you come in there, the statue of Buddha. Now, I've lost me some friends around here, because they think I guess I'm a Buddhist. It must mean, I'm not a Buddhist. I like that. It was here when I got it. And the Creator blessed me with this place, because they didn't want me to have it. So I left intact with his magic. Until I can do better magic, why disturb a setting? And I nothing against Buddha. He looks more like me than Christ. So consequently, what can I say? Well, he does.
Yeah.
Okay? And I'm a mixture already. But I'm just saying, I'm a mixture in mind and body, but he still comes closer. What can I tell you? So I got nothing against Buddha. My whole point is, we have to get back past the races of man, because we've been erroneously taught who and how the origin of man came. They have stated to you, man and mankind. And they mean exactly what they say. Man came from womb man, or wombless man. Okay? Womb man, on the race of man, was one who could bear young through gestation, and they were born live, not in eggs. Certain people, reptilian people, fish people, do not bear their young. They come through eggs and hatch. Womb man comes after a gestation period in which he goes through the transformation of all of the genetics that were behind him. That's why at one time they looked like a tadpole, because they were at one time from the tadpole people. But when you get up to this rank, in this vibration, you must be born whole. And you go through the other gestation period while in the womb. And only the female, as they call it, Fey Mani, little Fey. That's what female means, Fey Mina, minus Fey. So it shows you that's a disreputable word when you use feminine. Fey Mani, one minus Fey. What it should be would be Fey having faith, not minus. Because in having such faith, the womb could become like a little sun. Gestate, and if you've ever heard my womb man lecture, then I won't waste your time with the rest of it again, because I even stated these people at one time did not have sexual intercourse to reproduce. The gods that came through them were inspired by the sun, because these were people that had sun existences. These were goddesses. This is why now a lot of women are having a lot of problems, because our sun is now becoming magnetic, which is meaning a lot of system things are going to begin to grow in the breast and in the womb and in the bosom and the uterus, because it's being stimulated, where a womb man tries to go back to what she was before. You understand when to take in the sun and how to adjust the foods with that, these little growths won't start. Because it was when womb man was atypical, can produce asexually. That's a whole way out again. Got the tapes right over there if you want to go more into that. So the man that was born here, this is where I'm going to again go kind of deep, if none of this else has been deep. The mankind that was born here was a kind of the original man that was a prototype of the Negritos and Olmecs that were on Earth. Now, there were still races before that, which were called the elder races, of which we get our words E-L, L. They were light benders. They were L's because they formed the letter L because they came from the four corners of the universe. And they met here on these like 21 other planets like this. And they got together in a society to form other beings. And they brought 90 degrees of thought with them. 90 degrees each one, combining their thought to get what is now called the cross. And the center of the cross was mankind. A new kind of being bringing the best of all that they hoped that they could to see if there could be now some kind of creature that could bring in the best of CBS, the best of all the worlds, them on one world, and evolve into a higher creature, as they were very proud of their works and so on. The L's, and this is why you will find, I think it's something like 500 different prefixes in the English and American languages that prefix with EL. And they all mean the same kind of thing. Elders, higher ranks, lords, gods, El this, El that. They were the elders. And of course, again, you can contact the elders in your dreams, you can contact the elders in your walking days, whichever way you will. I think so much for the racial archaeological connections, and so I want to get into what of the mankind's and creatures and creators that are around here again. Let's just deal with areas that we can best understand. In the United States, there are at least close to 24 different areas by which you can go to what is called the let's call it the inner world. Some will call it the underworld. I have a whole tape on the underworld. In the inner world, there are cities, usually on about, there are 7 different areas, 7 different rounds or so, each one going deeper and deeper. On about the third one down is where you have a lot of creatures that are still living in cities down there. There's been all kind of stories about it, tokens, Middle-earth, the trolls and the goblins, the D-Rolls and the T-Rolls, all kind of names they have. I have it classified on the table. have been here for centuries. They were descendants of the original elves, the elders, in which the elders fled this particular solar system because the sun supernova became a very high radiation point, which means that even the gods can do, and began to stunt all life forms on the planets that carried life there. So they had to go into the ground, these fallen ones, what they call the abandonments, the Deros, the abandoned Deros, the inner earth people who were abandoned by the gods and who were left here with more powers than the mankind who developed on the surface, but yet they had to stay inside the earth, never to be known. Inside the earth is where many of the races of man have been cast out of. This is what is called the inner world, referred to now as underworld. Hell has been referred to only in the Hebrew, in the Torah, and in the Bible, simply because it meant hell was in the inner world, which now has been called the underworld. Hell was put into the Bible by the Abbot Odelio in the 13th century. The Abbot Odelio was told that through the Hell's Port, the gateway, the Pillars of Hercules, on an island called Patmos, that he could hear the moans and the groans of the descendants in the Hellias, in the underworld. And so therefore, the whole religion aspect was put in, combining Lucifer, which had nothing to do with the underworld, just the light being. Lucifer means the shining one, and I'm not saying I'm a devil worshiper. I'm not a devil worshiper. Lucifer has got nothing to do with the devil. There's another thing where consecrated thought so way out has confused so many things. But it referred to what was known as the various levels under the earth, by which there were people that lived that could not take the light of day, could only come out at night, by which there were people that had been crossbred, that had been cloned, that had been mutants, if you would, that from time to time would come up out of the earth, the demons of the earth, if you would. And since the hells were underneath every major city, every major continent, every major ocean, because there's a whole area down there that you can reach from the bottom of the sea, from the top of the mountain, a whole story was hidden about how they became. At Lake Victoria, and as we went to last week, on one side of Lake Victoria you have Mount Kilimanjaro, and you have pygmies. On another side you have the Watusi, some of the tallest. Here again is an anomaly. One lake, into the Hell's Court, cast you the smallest people of Earth and the tallest people of Earth. Many of the Watusi stated their God that they were seated by the gods, and they were. Because you have not only the 6 and 7, you have some Watusis 10 and 11 feet tall today. They don't have to tell you about that. They were from a different origin, if you would. And then you have little scrunchy pygmies. Obviously, again, something has happened to these people, they're little pygmies. But something has happened to most people around here. They have been genetically altered. What do you have? Mount Kilimanjaro, which has flying saucers, UFOs, and everything else, creatures that come out of the sea like Oasis and stuff like this, and then you have these people. It tells you that there was scientific genetic experiments that were carried on here to see not only who could be the best, who could create the best, as the gods warred about each other, but also, again, to see who could pass the test. And then you have certain souls later on who chose to go into these bodies to see, okay, the gods made this, you think your pagan God is good, I'll spend a lifetime in this body to find out what's happening. Now you say, that's crazy. If you feel that you go through all of this only to die and become nothing, then you've got to be already nothing. If you went through a lifetime to learn, there must be something more to do with this lifetime once you unlearn. So consequently, many people here have jumped into all kind of bodies. That's why through hypnosis, which deals with the mammalian brain. Another thing too, now they're talking about the reptile brain and the amygdala clip. You want the mammalian brain, you don't want the reptile brain right now. And that, I'm going to have a brain class coming up too. I say that a lot. Now that I can actually begin to talk and do research on a higher scale. But we'll get into that too. The mammalian brain is one that has a universal origin. You have your dolphins who are mammalians, if you would. They're in the water, but they have to also breathe air, which lets you understand the type of soul that is. They must surface from time to time to breathe air, yet they can become part of the gills. There's a lot of problems now that are happening with people with thyroid problems. And many people, Caucasian nurses and researchers, will say it's a gill problem. That the thyroid is trying to become a gill like it once was if it was in your bloodline. But they don't tell you this. And it's being augmented by the magnetic sun. So people are going to have thyroid problems. Unless they keep telling you to take iron. Iron is a Martian element. We don't want to even go there yet. That would be more confusing, I think, than anything else. You need to get a balance between the two. You You need iodine as part of your iron because you must have the things that came from the sea to feed the thyroid glands. This is why you have parathyroids. They call it sham thyroids. No, you have to have regulators on both sides to make sure what kind of energies are taking in. All of the glands that we have are not all of the glands that we have. Did this confuse you with that? What's on the physiognomist chart is not all the glands in your body. There are glands inside your body and organs inside your body that they don't even know how it got there. And sometimes they cut off of a person if that person was a clone, or the person was a mutant, or the person was what they call a screed or a hybrid. They're walking around looking like you till you cut them open. And then they don't look anything like you. And they say, well, what is this? Then they whisk it off to Area 51 or someplace else to study, give it to Harvard University for research, give it to University of Chicago on one of those. They now have 13 floors down there now. I think there's somebody might be able to verify that. I mean, what I'm saying to you is, unless you really open your mind, what you're hearing today will seem like a fairy tale. But if you keep your mind open, you will find just enough of one part that maybe you know, or all the parts that maybe you know, which will begin to strike bells and ring gongs with you, because it gives you explanation for things that you have not had explanation for before, simply because you were never told the truth before. In the first place, many of mankind did not know the truth. They only knew what they were told. They only knew what they were read. Many of mankind, the best of them, they killed off, because they killed off their scholars and attacked their priests because they were ignorant. So how can you get an ignorant person now who writes books and tells you how to interpret a book? Think about it. They state that when the Greeks came in to, where was it again? To parts of Africa. Alexander the Greek. Now, why is every time you say Alexander, you have to say the Great? His mother didn't call him Alexander the Great. The scholars called him Alexander the Great. Very poor scholars called him Alexander the Great. Alexander from Macedonia, the Macedonian. They could not read, the Greeks. They could not write. They had no literature. They could kill very well, and they were like animals, and they wore the skins of animals and the heads of animals, with blood dripped on them, and they stank. And when they came into there, they were then the persons now supposed to start the Parthenon, they started all kind of Greek literature. How could they couldn't read, they couldn't write. And they were not very psychic, except with animals. Right? So if you read that whole story, you'll find that the Alexandrian Museum and Library was really the own library from the Anu, or Onu, which was an ancient library that the extraterrestrials had set up here. They call it Alexandria. How could they build and put books into it if they could not read and write? It was called the Library at On, from Uranus and from Anu, the ancient extraterrestrials and scholars that came here and built these temples where people could go in there and be worked on, scales and feathers cut off, could be again mentally put to sleep and try to impregnate their mind with higher thoughts. This is why they had these temples. The Parthenon was from Parthenogenesis, which meant that when the people here didn't need to mate like an animal would. That's why the menses is based on animal life. The menses are followed by animals. And it is a part of the animal that is still in the species here. Wombless man is even worse, because without womb man, he can't even reproduce. This is why man is a mule. Man is a mule. Man is not womb man. Cannot reproduce himself, and unless a female chooses to do so, the race of man would be gone. Take out that Y chromosome for 100 years, you got no men. You see what I'm saying? All of these things should show you something. But they don't want you to see the overall picture, because you would know that you are not a god. You are not a goddess. You are not a spirit. You are not a person. You are not a man. You are nothing else again. You are a being, part of the Creator, that's experiencing something. You take on a body. You make gods. You make religion. And you make each other. But there are many ways to make each other. Some do it in laboratories. Some do it by open sex. Some do it by worshiping the sun and having gestation periods start that way, and all along the line. They teach you wrongly. In 2 hours, I'm trying to correct all those wrongs. It's impossible to do what I'm doing, but I'm going to attempt it. At least I'll make you think. Every time you leave here, I want you to be thinkers. Then you don't follow anybody. If you don't leave here thinking, you haven't come to one of Brother Blair's lessons. They also have had what they call, bases. I want to get back to that a little bit. Area 51, Dulce, Montauk, Iron Mountain, places down in Texas, places throughout the desert areas, Arriba, all these little places out in the deserts of South America, in the mountains of Peru, where they still have these big cities up there. Why do they have these big, beautiful cities up there in the mountains if they had to travel up with beasts and mules, drag up the concrete, pour it, mix it, drag up the boulders? Why not just build it on the surface? Build it down there? Obviously, these were gods. They landed up in there. They didn't want to descend amongst the apes down there and the crazy people. So they stayed up there, near the heavens and the gods, and they used a whole different things. When you see again in the mountains of Yucatan, it's at Zac-Uxal, at Tiahuanaca, and so you see these step pyramids and ziggurats. The step pyramids were for the serpent people who came down, landed their little saucers-like ships on a flat surface, opened up, and came down these great big gangplanks and so walking down amongst the other people. And you still see the carvings of the serpents right on the ziggurats. But they ignore that and say, well, they were just, I don't know what they call it, stylized drawings and stuff. These were the serpents that came out of the craft for certain people, and they had bitter battles with the Olmecs. The Olmecs were some who came from Mars, okay, who colonized Mars when they came from Sirius and then came here. Many of the Martians. And they're finding up there now the same thing that they're finding on the Giza plateau. Remind me, that's how what again all this. But these serpent people came down there, they made sacrifices to it. They did everything else again, because if they didn't, we're going to eat them up anyway. So they gave them their best and hoped they left the rest. And this is what the sacrifices, they said, they sacrificed to the gods. What gods? Serpent gods. How would you go around eating some people? It wouldn't be too nice for you. But if you were a serpent or a reptile, you'd love that. Okay? So I'm simply saying, follow the histories, and when the histories go kind of south, go south with them, like the climate. But don't stop and say it can't exist. Don't stop and do what people knew the Earth did, where they had to discover everything because they'd never been here before. They were in the inner world for a while. To show you how crazy I am, I'll even give you reference points to do your research. Read about the gates of Nuremberg and the green ones. Happened about 17... It was either about 1825 or 35. When you look up Nuremberg, look up the green ones. These were people, a boy and a girl, who came to the gates of Nuremberg, Germany. They were green. They were taken in. People couldn't understand who they were. They said they were demons, but there were some people who began to try and help them because they seemed to be intelligent. They were speaking, but nobody could understand their language. The girl lived on. The boy died after about 8 months. As this girl ate the food that was there, and so she changed from a green color to a pale, kind of a pasty color, and resembles many of the Germanic people that were around at this particular time. She later on married and had children, but the origin of her, she said, they came from inside the earth, where there were many green people, and that there was a light that shone, and they got lost one day walking one of their animals, and found that they followed a light, and they went to sleep, and then finally they stumbled out what seemed to be a day and a night to them, they're not sure, and finally came to the surface, and this is why they were very hungry, and they came to the gates of Nuremberg. You have many Germanic people who came from inside the earth. You have many people that were green and turned pink, or turned a different color. You have so many things going on here now that to argue about race is one of the most ridiculous things you can do, because you can spend the rest of your life trying to argue about the origin of some of the races that came here. I just gave you the basic three. The bases that are here still connect in many cases with underground cities where many people still live. Some aliens still live down there. Extraterrestrials live there, and terrestrials live there. Our Earth was called Terra. Terra is where we get the word terrestrial, where we get the word extraterrestrial, which means a little bit more than a terrestrial, an alien. A terrestrial is a person born, created, made, or so in or on the earth. That's the best way I can say it. Extraterrestrial is somebody that looks somewhat like a terrestrial, has had a time to spend either on this planet or a planet like terrestrial, and has something in common. An alien is anything that's intelligent. It could be from an insect to a bird, but it's intelligent, and it has reached the height of its own species. It's been stated that everything ever created has a chance, when the soul comes into it, to reach the height of its incarnation, which means you can have intelligent birds, extremely ones, intelligent insects, intelligent fish, anything that flies, creeps, or crawls can reach intelligence, if you would. The connection between many of the monoliths that are on Earth merely means that beneath that area at one time was a great extraterrestrial or alien city or enclave. It was a marker by which incoming ships and incoming people could tell who was where. Okay? Usually, on that area, you will find spawn a type of a creature, mankind, where this interterrestrial civilization put on the surface, sent out from the garden and the earth, a certain kind of mankind to watch them, to feed them, to work with them, to give them religion, to talk with them, and see how that species went. And this is why they were isolated, why you had so many different kinds. The markers are these great big granite monoliths, which are really loudspeakers, which are really like energy gatherers from the surface that can take in rays and convert it down to the inner city crystals and things down there, and you have whole crystalline places, if you would. Much of the craft that is here that says they've come from outer space, don't come from any outer space at all. Much of the craft is from inner Earth cities, let out through tunnel openings or through mountains or out of the oceans. This is why you see them coming up and going from the oceans and out of mountain craft, because we don't know anything about the intelligent life inside of our own Earth. There are dimensional travelers. This is the one that seem to fade in and out and so, who have come from interstellar space and interdimensional space that may come from out of our solar system. In our solar system, there are also creatures that immediately go back and forth and have come from our Earth and other places to habitat some of these other planets. Even planets that they say must be devoid of life because of the heat or because of the water can have life, because we don't understand how those things can be converted by the soul into usable atmospheres. That's all I'm going to say about that. We could go on forever again. They cannot tell you what planet can have life or not have life because they don't have enough intelligence to understand adaptation and interdimension and frequency. What is hot can be cold. To show us that, there are people under hypnosis that you can put something boiling hot on their skin. They will feel it as cold and the skin will not blister. But these are usually people who are hybrids. Different, you see. We think everybody that looks like us or looks like them or looks like they are they. They can be clones, they can be hybrids, they can be mutants, and because they have the veneer inside of the body, like the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, we think that they're all alike. They're not all alike. And you don't know what you got. And certain medicines are for some people, certain herbs are for some people, certain foods are for some people. There's some people that don't even eat food that we know of. They take pills, they go for their shots, and they get electrocuted. I call it electrocuted because they have to receive radiation treatments. Notice how all of your presidents, notice now even with Art Bell, how he must take vacations off and on now. Art Bell said one word when he came back, and they gave him 500 different affiliates. You don't give that to somebody that's out of control. You make sure to control it. He stated when he came back, or during his time of his interim, he had gone underneath the Denver airport, and he had seen things that no one has seen, he knows of, while he was down there. He said that when he came back his first week. I listen to what people say. And I look past what they say and also look at what they're saying. Again, here's another prototype being put up on now to influence people. One thing, you keep you up all night long. When you do that again, you're already becoming interdimensional because you can't dream too much if you're constantly going in and out. What they put on, why would they give them daytime stuff? Because daytime stuff is not how they want to influence. They want to influence your consciousness. They want to influence your spirituality. They want you to broaden. If you broaden, you don't have to sleep as much. So consequently, they're also working with you. They're playing games. That's what they call technology. There are many crafts that are seen that are called UFOs. UFOs means unidentified flying objects. Many of the craft are what they would call IFOs, identified flying objects. Many of them are AFOs, aquatic flying objects. They fly in the water. They have interdimensional craft that fade in and out. You've got so many kind of vehicles, but keep in mind, if the creature flying it has to use a craft, they are not very advanced. Now, we think they're advanced so they can zoom through the sky and so on like that. You can zoom through the sky, too, in your astral body if you understood how to work the Merkaba. But you don't, because they didn't teach you that. That's the difference between a scientific artificial vehicle and a natural, if you would call it, biological vehicle. There are many of mankind, when I'm saying that now, we're talking about terrestrials, mutants, cyborgs, clones, what else should I call it? Whatever again. Or mankind. that have made what they call Avro. Some call it Avro cars. It simply means alien vehicle reproduction ordinances. They back engineer crafts that have crashed, craft that they've been given, craft that they have generally been worked with to try and see if they can make them suitable for their life forms. Why? Because there are many allegiances that have been made with the world governments, especially Caucasian world governments, using that term for the want of anything else, who have made deals with Greys, who have made deals with Andromedans, who have made deals with Pleiadians, people from Orion, and they were given, for the sake of being able to work with some of the creatures here on Earth, they were given vehicles, or told, well, here, we'll give it to you, you can make it fly, wonderful. One thing they don't do is to teach them how to fly and shoot. Most of these UFO crafts, all they can do is propulse, but they can't shoot out beam weapons from it or anything else. That's why they now have to have satellites to put the beam weapons on, because the Avros cannot shoot. And one of the things they want to do is not only fly fast, they want to kill fast. They want to raid and beam and stuff, and they don't know how to get the propulsion mechanism to do both. So there is actually leading up to a battle, if you would, that's going on between terrestrials, extraterrestrials, and aliens. And where I'm going to conclude that, because I don't want to get into that in itself, you've already had enough, I feel, on this part, will begin to blow your mind. But there is a battle going on for the originators of the 23-kilometer Earth that now want to come back to claim those who have evolved best on the Earth and take them into other dimensions and higher dimensions, because you earned it. And a battle for those who are like called reptiles, and those who are called dracons, and so, who can't do that, who have really no souls to speak of. They live a long time, but they don't have soul qualities. They don't have that kind of spirit quality. We're very jealous of it all. And would love to just eat you up. What is happening with many of the Greys and what they call the cattle mutilations, because you have so many incoming aliens that need substance and food that they're eating the cattle up. So they have to hide the cattle from you, telling you now that there's a mad cow disease, telling you the cattle mutilations is something else, because they're eating them up. And they need them. They're taking them back to their home planet, because of the sun in our area now is causing them to die out on their own planets, causing them to now be pushed further away from us. You see, there's a lot of things going on. So they're using the cattle, telling you the cattle are no good, so they need the cattle. And you won't think anything of it. Half the cattle being destroyed aren't. When they're being destroyed, they're being melted down, if you would, just like we melt down for glue and stuff like this, and they're rubbing it on their bodies, and they're taking it away. And when they go out of cattle, you're next. So I'm simply saying you're having also disappearing people. Be glad they're taking the cattle. And that's also because there's a battle amongst extraterrestrials as to just how vicious they can be here on Earth before this whole thing comes to an end. So they know what's happening with the cattle. There's nothing wrong with the cattle. They know what's happening with the fowl. There's nothing wrong with the fowl, other than what they've created to be wrong with the fowl. But simply, even in doing that, they're serving another purpose. It's causing people to stop eating so much meat. They're getting afraid, and that's good. Because when you don't eat so much meat, then the physical body can't be as big and as strong as it was. Because your protein has to come from another source. But your soul and mental body can begin to develop. The light can come in, you'll sleep less, because when you eat a lot, you know what's going to happen. You're going to sleep. You cannot think and sleep, and think and eat at the same time. That's why after Thanksgiving, you go to sleep. But when you can get higher foods, higher vibration foods, you become more wisdom-seeking, you become keener, you can wake up at night and have to sleep all the way through, and your energy fields grow, you begin to glow, which means also you're attracting the very people that you want, who were so low as a beast they couldn't even get to you. So you had to go with the lesser gods, the gods created with mankind. Finally, I guess you say, wow, at least finally he's going to draw to an end. Yes, I will. We want to talk about the Giza pyramid and the Earth, Moon, Mars connection. Why is there so much talk about Moon and Mars? And a very interesting thing that happened recently when the United States, in an overflight, was attacked supposedly by a Japanese, Chinese fighter pilot, and he crashed into it and they fell. That's a long story. That's been going on for 2 or 3 years now. They've had near buzzers, probably had some other things, but this one got out. They couldn't hide this particular one. When they finally got the plane together, who came in and flew it out? The Russians. And people said, why in the world would the United States have a Russian plane come in and take out an American spy plane? Well, why not? They built it. They might as well send it back to who built it in the first place. There has been a unison between Russia and the United States. There was never a Cold War. That was a Cold War to you. There's never been a gas crisis. That was a gas crisis for you. What they have been doing is to bring a commonality of the species that they are with the most intelligent ones between the United States and Russia to try and get off the Earth, to try and do everything they can to establish moon bases, bases on Mars and every place else, because they know they can't stay on the surface much longer with the skins that they have. They want to create synthetic melanin, they cannot do it. They try, but the creatures fail. That's what Atlanta child murders were all about. See, we can go all kind of different ways with this one again. The United States and Russia, when you had the one that, I went through that, so I want to, the submarine that was down there in the, what is it, sea, and something like that, the Kursk and all this stuff. Then you had the naval vehicle that was almost blown up. This was retaliation because they still got out of line. And their little alien friends didn't want them to get that much out of line. So the aliens give the United States some information, they give Russia some information, and they keep on playing games in hopes that they can avert the catastrophe, but in the meantime use up all the other races of Earth very quickly. The other races are being contacted by their own gods, if you would, or their own extraterrestrials. But there is no division between Russia and the United States. The United States built the biggest manufacturing for trucks and automobile and tank parts in Russia. Went over there and sent them not only the personnel, gave them the money and built it. How can you build for your enemy a tank manufacturing company? When they went to the moon, the Russians, if you remember, when Kennedy came into office, I'm just referring to make you think, because you got to use your brains. Don't count on just the press. Think. 1960, when Kennedy came into power, what did they do? They wanted to beat the Russians to the moon. The Russian launched 2 weeks before the first Apollo series, or what do you call it, Apollo? I forget what they call it then. Okay? What happened to the Russian launch? I've talked about this. The Russian launch got blasted out of the sky by an alien craft. And it was a female and 2 men, and she was hanging up there, babbling all kind of Russians, going crazy, talking about it. Now they're coming for me. All that was wiped out. And you didn't see Russia go on spaceships to the moon. After that, what did they start doing? They went into metaphysics. They started going into Curlian photography. They started going into mind control and psychics, because they had seen out there that that was not there's not going to be physical anymore, that they had some less physical superiority. The United States still played the game, and we still believe in our United States. So consequently, we believe anything the government tells us. All right? There is no difference between the Russian government and the United States government. This is why whoever it is president of the United States now, I forget his name, and Putin got together. Okay? Well, he's not president of the United States. Let's face it, he was selected. Okay? He's got alien blood too. His father has alien blood, but they hold him. Now, what it is, if you understand what David Icke said, it makes sense. But at any rate, they got together. He went over there for some marching orders. That's what he went over there for. And to find out where they're getting along on their Mars mission and on their moon mission, and to see if the scientists now, who he doesn't trust, were lying, and he thought maybe Putin was telling the truth, because they don't respect him either. What is happening there is they have a base on the moon, the United States and Russia. They have a base on Mars already, United States and Russia. And they have what they call the ancient Nazis, if you would, and that's a whole different symbolism too, the ancient aliens that came to the Hitler and to Kaiser Wilhelm and came to all of them trying to help the Caucasoid Palladian people. As I say, it's just a great big game. Montauk, Dulce, what's this other, Brookhaven, all are using portal developments. They're all using things to try and develop the Earth to a point that they can go outside the electromagnetic field, begin to be able to shape-shift and to go into astral projection like people with melanin can, and to see if they can get off this planet and become the hierarchy of the gods. They can't in the bodies that they happen to be in at this particular time, but they've learned enough through incarnations here to find out what can be done. This is why they're always trying to make melanin, and it still comes down to trying to make anything that can hold melanin and use what they call melanin itself. They found granulated melanin. What did they find out there? Black holes, absorbing everything. Dark matter does do that. The thing is, when does dark matter spit it back out? I can tell you again about black holes, but I want to separate that out too. The Giza plateau, this is what we'll end with. The Giza plateau and Cydonia on Mars and certain areas again around Jupiter are all of the same thing. And on the moon, they were all built by Olmecan people following the Syrian godhead. When they came to a planet, they left certain symbols to let the people coming in know that that was now under Syrian dictatorship or Syrian rule. Since they were Olmecs, they made them either in their image or like other creatures around Sirius A or B's image, which would be the cat-like family, the feline family, or the mammal family. They left in the oceans cross species so that mankind could come together. Dolphins, porpoises, all come from Sirius B, and Sirius C, if you would. And so they left them into the ocean so they could have a contact in the ocean that had spirituality, that could dream, and could be benevolent. They left other creatures on the surface of Earth. And after the great radiation war that was here once before, that's where most of the deserts were formed from anyway, radiation, Gobi blast, Sahara blast, which is nothing but radiation mass where the life was killed off and deserts followed. All these things have gone on for a certain time. Beneath the Giza plateau, which is a time capsule, there are pyramids underneath the pyramids and sphinx underneath the sphinx. They pretty much told you about this when you hear about Thoth and the rulership of judgment of the soul. It cannot go to the inner world or off the planet if it has the weight of one little thing, an ounce. If the soul has one thing that is not cleared up on this planet, it can't go anywhere but must repeat the cycles. So remember that Hall of Justice says the two balances. You have the feather weight on your soul that stops you from progressing. You cannot degress into the earth or get off the earth. You just incarnate or go through all kinds of other changes. You have to clear the soul. That's why soul, or sons, nothing to do under. Because until you get every teaching under the sun and learn what's under the sun, how can you go to other suns or other planets? How can you go to other suns of the sun? They try to teach this. So underneath there are 8 paths. They call it eightfold paths. 8 tunnels that lead to the various principal cities underneath the earth on its third and fourth level. This is where they used to come and convene from the inner earth and find out what was happening on the surface of earth. This is why it is so deep there again. The king's chamber, of course, as we talked about, was never used as a burial place. You don't bury people in pyramids. That gave you life. How do you bury the dead and something's going to give you life? Why do they put canopic jars and have the entrails there? Because under cloning and so, you can take any of those and make a whole race of people from just the clone matter that's in those jars. You can reproduce Akhenaten, if you would. You can reproduce any of the other gods and so, where they were already crossbreeds. We'll have to get with that another time. Underneath there are not the burial chambers, but actually imprisoned, if you would, in time capsules again. Aliens of all types. They left them there for the people, for mankind to see. All right? They showed you the origins under there. They have capsules that will show you the development of certain species. They have interdimensional craft that are down there. And all of them are understood because they can be accessed by certain, I won't even name the cities, that's on another case. And they have other pyramids around the earth that once that one lights up, will automatically light up the other pyramids which are on what they call a straight line theory. To give you again a reference point, because you see I get way out. Then I bring back things that you can easily trace. The big companies, Northern Tel, Meritech, all of these, are using a blue pyramid in the Atlantic Ocean to bounce their signals off. They're using a kind of a yellow quartz pyramid in the Pacific Ocean, near Bimini, to send signals off of. They didn't build them. They bounce the signals off of, so everybody thinks they must be wondrous. They have built a blue pyramid down there, and they're bouncing signals. They'll tell you that they laid a cable, transoceanic, that's sending these signals across the ocean. The kind of things that they made those cables of at the time they built it would have eroded through salt water or been bitten through by 2 or 3 sea monsters by this time. They are bouncing the signals off of the pyramid to orbiting satellites, which aliens and extraterrestrials still might have built, and they're sending the signals down to various points. Those pyramids soon will be activated, which means that all communication will be cut off, is depending on those pyramids. Because those pyramids have a structure in their own. They want psychic thought. They work telepathically. They augment the pineal crystal pyramid in your brain. And those bodies that have that will begin to get those signals, and that's how they were broadcast through. SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is a big joke. They're searching for words. They're searching for sound. higher individuals don't use words and sound. They use thought. They don't search for extraterrestrial thought. They search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which they say must be audible. Audible is the lowest register of vibrational rate you can get. Sound travels 750 miles a second, that is all. You see what I'm saying to you? Every discipline we're being told is to hold us back. We told you before, search the canned goods and see what's in it. And understand when you open that can, that's what you're eating. And look up some of those things that are in that can. All of it dulls your psychic capability. Look at the things that we drink and all the stuff that's in the water. In Chicago alone, you have 33 different things and chemicals in the water alone. 33 different ones. Look at the pop that we drink, which leaches out calcium, cuts off the nerve endings. I mean, we're being given foods, maybe of the gods, but that particular god, you don't want to follow. In summation, I simply say this. I don't think we can get too more way off than we got today. That's what we said last week. That's what we said the week before. There's one more after this one. The overall plan, the real reason for the chem sprays and all like that. We'll see again when we present that and if we present that. I will still say this. The best thing you can do is spend at least 15 minutes a day with yourself. You spend an hour with yourself or a day with yourself. That would be even more wonderful. Go into meditation. Don't just eat and go to bed. Go to bed hungry. Hungry for wisdom. When you eat and go to bed, you go into a certain sleep state. When you think and go to bed, you open up a whole avenue. Find out for yourself who you're going to meet, when you're going to meet them, what you're supposed to hear. Because your thoughts will manifest pictures that can answer any question you have. And the more you use it, the more you tune into the planet, into the crystals at the pyramid, into the moon, into the sun, into everything else. Because this is what this age is for. The magnetic frequency of Earth is coming back to unite the helixes. I'm not going to go further into that. If you can't get control of your thoughts, how can your helixes unite? Because if they would unite, they would send out a signal that you couldn't tune to, and you'd kill yourself. Many people are killing themselves now and others because they're being given these drugs. As they're being experimented with these aliens, you're going to find mass suicides and murders and husbands and wives. All of this is understood because there's a mind control thing. That's what I want to go into the next time we have. In general, believe in yourself. Believe that you are here for a purpose. Believe that you have a beautiful mind, a beautiful brain, and a beautiful body. Believe that everything you need to know, you can contact directly. You don't need me, you don't need teachers, you don't need ministers, you don't need professors. What you need is time with yourself. Because then you can interpret false teachers, false religions, false professors, and false people. It's the only way to truly find out who you are. And I will begin to try it out. And you've been with me for a long time, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. As is usual the case, I don't run away after giving these things out, so you have two choices. You can go directly into a question, comment session. You can do it while you eat if you choose to get refreshments now, or it's up to you. But whatever you decide, that's the way that we work. Now, how many of you want to go directly to a question, comment session? So just raise your hand. How many would rather take a break and eat and then come back and do it later? So if you go into questions and comments, we'll go again by hand, so I have to have somebody to go between if you don't mind. And so we'll go this one here for me. You don't have to give your name, or whoever starts up the question or comment.
And I just happened to, I went by and kind of looked in there and I saw all of these computer games in there and what have you, so I'm wondering what's going on. And the name of this particular store is called Giant Eagle.
Giant Eagle. That's appropriate. That's appropriate. And again, thank you very much for your comments as usual. They're classic. And most of you have had some classic statements to make and comments to make again. Are there any other comments or questions or shares? Got one coming over from afar? All right.
During your lecture, you mentioned that there's no such thing as Negroids. You said they were originally, the word originally came from Negro, which means dead. And I kind of lost something in my notes, because then you started referring to people as Negroid again,
There's no such thing as a Negro.
So it was that one, and also, we since we need protein, and the meat is getting messed with. I'm a strict vegetarian, and soy products are being altered heavily too. So what is a good source of protein?
Last one is eat anything you want to eat. But you bless it first, you eat of it sparingly, and you make sure that it gets digested and metabolated. Whatever it is, the more metabulating juices that you have to use, and you now have things being given back from plants, the enzymes and so. And of course, if you bless it, you already begin to break it down in your system anyway. Okay? We stopped praying over our food because we didn't know what we were praying over. We weren't praying over, you were putting energy into the food, so you got the most from the food, and you told the food where it was going to go, what it was going to do, the whole bit. That was the art of eating. As it is now, since they messed up soy and you well hit it, soy is really messed up nowadays. I was the person told me you're going to get soy milk. I said, well, you might as well go and get some cow milk. You're going to do that. Oh, no, Blair, there you go again. But it's true. If you do the research on soy, and I've got a pamphlet that big breaking down the soy industry again. So I would say it's not what you eat, it's how much or little of it you eat, and how you metabolate it and what you do with it once it's into the system. And they have things now. If you're taking the gold products that we have over there, and you take the DNA boost, what you don't need is going to pass right through you anyway. What you do absorb will have to be broken down into the finest articulation. So once you begin to get in the things from the seed, your chlorophyll-containing products and all like this, you mix it with gold, you will absorb it. You'll get your nutrients. Now the only thing is, you will not get bulky. If you get bulky and you do the weights and you do things like this, then you have to take in some of the animal proteins or soy proteins along this line. Other than that, you'll just get strong. It's a big difference. Right? Now, the first part you mentioned was on Negro and Negroid and so on like that. I didn't make myself clear. Let me try again. Negro is an artificial word. There's no such thing as a Negro. Negro, metaphysically, comes from the word necro, N-E-C-R-O. They simply, if you remember how they used to do it, they used to make a C, and they go a straight line across the top of that C. It wasn't even just indentated. It was just a straight line. That was a homemade word. Necro, it comes from the word, there's a whole phylum of words there. Necro, necrophile, necrophilia. It means the dead, the lost, the place of the dead, the unknown, the unknowing, and so on like that. And that was what happened when they broke the helixes. In the original melanated people, the gift of the gods was melanin. And when some of these Dracons, some of these Andromedans, some of these Pleiadians came around, they fixed it so that the offspring, they broke helixes. But I want to get into that on the next one. We're supposed to have 12. We've only got 1.5 and 2. Some people are getting the third. If the sun continues, all these helixes will unite, and the RNA and DNA and the chromosomes on them will begin to work again, and you'll be able to do a lot of things you couldn't do before. They broke that. But as our sun turns magnetic, it's going to reunite that. So what I meant was, and then I use Negroid because I'm still using the terminology, like I stopped Africa for a while there, but I went back to it later on, because we've been ingrained so that the picture you get from the word is what I want you to see. I told you, or told in general, what it should be called, or one of the other words it had. But then you must picture whatever it is you want, no matter what word I use. As we do this, no matter what a person says, you'll be picturing what that person is about anyway, and that's telepathy. That's telepathy. So, again, I hope it made it a little bit clear this time.
And also, you mentioned that the people from the Pleiades came here and brought forth 3 types of people. First was the blondes. Then you said there was a Zeta Reticular. And from there you named several different types. What was the third type?
Okay, you had a blonde, you had a gray. This was some of the degenerate Pleiadians, if you would, which is a gray type group. and I don't see the third one on here again. There was a blonde, a gray, and I don't have the notes on the third. The Pleiadians themselves, as I say, are so deceptive, they probably have created a whole lot of different subspecies. They have made a lot of mutants they have definitely come about with, and hard to know. I would probably think, since Orion is in the Pleiades, that you could have everything from a screed type, have a hook-nosed gray, you could have a small gray, you could have a tall blonde, you could have a small blonde. A lot of the blondes, which sometimes do 12 feet tall, which are referred to here under the secret government as Nordics, are found in some of these crafts. They're found at Area 51. They're found working alongside with these grays, and because they're blonde and tall, they automatically say, well, they are the higher species. They are not. Many of them who were Pleiadians outside of the different other planets have been mind controlled, or they actually under captivity. They actually can control souls even with some of their technology. And they're simply working for these people, and since they're a little bit stronger physically, they use them for physical manifestation. But you have all kind of blondes, you have all kind of grays, you have all kind of screeds, you have all kind of everything. There's always in all races, since a high and a low, a weak and a strong.
This week I was reading in the Tribune, I think, about an article where they were talking about everything, all our foods soon will be irradiated, and that they're building, somebody's building a big factory near here soon to expand radiation. Right now they're just doing a few produces, but they're going to, everything's almost going to be radiated. And we were talking about some species on Earth having evolved from radiation, or radiated as radiation or something. It made me think about a book that I got where it was saying that Atlantis might have been destroyed by the explosion, nuclear explosion, and I'm just wondering. I also thought about the water, the Earth having been destroyed by a flood, and Noah saving species. Of course, I think you said that didn't make sense. But anyway, I'm wondering, is it possible that did you buy into that there was Earth was destroyed once or twice by nuclear explosions, mass civilization, nuclear explosions, and what about the flood also?
Okay, well, there have been many floods, and many of the floods have wiped out civilizations. We probably have lost more civilizations here than we'll ever remember by using chronology and history and written records. So they come and they go. The Earth itself, of course, as I stated, my understanding, is a prototype planet in which a lot of advanced beings have a lot to do with the making of Earth. The Earth having been destroyed itself, I don't buy, because once they made this one, it's been very guarded, like these 21 other ones, it's very closely guarded. And when a cross-civilization or a master race or so comes to the point of destroying the Earth, usually they're destroyed, they wipe the slate clean, they start all over again, because it is like a Zelle planet, a planet of whatever. So I don't think that. Now, well, I don't want to get into that because
I meant civilizations.
Pardon?
I meant civilizations. Like
civilizations.
One writer said Atlantis was destroyed by nuclear explosions. There were several nuclear explosions at one time that destroyed the civilization on Earth, Atlantis included.
Well, there have been many so-called civilizations lost. As we talked about about 4 weeks ago, and I think you were there, we talked about Hyperborea. Nobody remembers that. Usually, again, you're making me get into some areas I don't want to get into, but that's my final session on these keys, again, if you would. But usually there's always a remnant saved alive that is kept somewhere, and then they restart once it goes again, if they reach something, if they choose to still go on with the learning lesson here. Trouble is here, I mean, the enticement here is you get so many promotions. You can get quadruple promoted if you can make it through here and there. So you get past a lot of other things by having a certain on a prototype kind of like this. But yeah, I think a lot has come, a lot has gone. One of the things that this government in its fledgling state that it is still tries to honor are people who can understand the history of this planet. And they've been typified as Moors, they've been talking about sovereigns, people who understand that before any of this was set up, they were here anyway, and they claim that right. They claim their ancestral gods as their right, so why should they follow yours? But there are portions of this government now, so aliens control that what used to be manifest destiny, what used to be if you had certain intelligence and wisdom you could get somewhere with, aliens are wiping that out because they want mass control. So almost all that's by the by. We're about to start another one here again, but I think this time on a whole different level. That's my own feeling.
Have you heard anything about something city that they found off the coast of Cuba? I was listening to Dreamland on Sunday, like Bell's show, and they were talking about something city, and they're supposed to be sending some type of camera down there to start photographing things. I know they're not going to tell us if they find anything, but I just wondered if you know anybody.
Yeah, you missed our last session. Melody had and she was talking about Cuba, coast of Cuba. Right. One of the things that was interesting, of course, Russia and Cuba have had allegiances. The United States have set up an embargo on Cuba, so why should now Cuba share anything with the United States? Yeah. Yet the United States was trying to send some of its scientists there by saying, well, look, we're not coming as United States citizens, we're coming as scientists. And of course, the Cuban government, under Castro, says, "Up it. You know, we still understand where you're coming from. Right. Russia's been with us again, so if you get there, it'll be because they told you to come there again." Well, what's also interesting, as we look at Cuba and many of the things there, they're finding the same thing off the west coast of Africa. They're finding the same thing around the islands of Bimini, which is not too far from there. They're finding something coming up in the Mediterranean, near what they used to call it, the Aegean Sea. A lot of things are surfacing. They're finding them in Japan. There's something coming up there, and pyramids are coming up. The old and the new go up and down. Okay? The Gulf was once a part, now we have the Gulf, what we call the Gulf of Mexico, part of the Atlantic Ocean, of course. They just don't call it that. It used to be up. Now it's down. Mm-hmm. We're having things coming up out the bottom of the ocean. The ocean is coming up. Mm-hmm. We're in some floods. We're in for a lot of things. I want to go into this all at once. I don't want to just differentiate. But yes, I had heard about it. Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, you mentioned contacting the guys, and you were talking about phoning home, using amulets, and sleep, thinking before you go to sleep. Now, is there any other ways you can contact the gods or to make that connection clear?
Depends on which God, and depends again on who you want to phone. You gotta have a number that ought to call. Otherwise, Bell will hook you up with anything. Wrong number, sorry. People have been contacting the gods within themselves for the longest. And once you contact the God within yourself, you automatically know what to do. It's a matter of spending time, meditation, and going within. This is why religion stops you from doing spiritual. And they say it's reverse it is. Because anytime you have to wait for a person to phone home for you, then you don't know your number, you don't know your mama, you don't know your daddy, and you're using a go-between. You never have to have a go-between between you and the creator, because you wouldn't be here with the soul and melanin unless you had it here. So it's a matter of spending time with yourself. This is what people want to do. You want to blame everybody and wait on everybody instead of doing the work for themselves. But once you do it, you know what you got. And if you have fear with what you get, then you bring in devils and demons and things. If you don't have fear with what you get, because you don't have inhibitions within yourself, you make that contact, you know you have that contact, and the contact will come again. And exactly what you want, you will get. It's another thing. People say they want something, but then you also say you deserve something. If you think you deserve it, then you don't have to want it, you can get it. And this is what they pay speakers, positive thinking, billions of dollars for. But it's manifested all the time. It's just a matter of what you want. That's my feeling about it.
This is only to piggyback off the last statement, of course, plate shifting, what goes up and down towards the landmass. I just had a feeling when I was in Mexico that the white sands there, at one time that was the ocean. I just wanted to, within my inner self, I felt like that was the one time ocean. And now, the land is, is changing. Just like if you go up to, just like I've never been, but if you go up to, it's an Indian, I can't think of these, but an A, with the Native Americans, it's cliff. They lived in cliffs, and you have to get a rope to get up there. It's in the United States.
Oh, the Aztecs, were the slaves?
Up there by Utah or whatever,
Yeah.
The cliffs, whatever. I think at one time there was water there. I don't think they just climbed. I think that there was a flood, and that's my inner belief. And there was water there, and they lived in those caves until it subsided. Generational.
Right.
Well, it's very interesting, and I agree with what you say. It's interesting that recently, I think we talked about this in one of our sessions almost a year and a half ago, that they were going to flood parts of the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River, because they wanted to save the ecology and some other kind of reason that they were about ecology. So it let me know something else was wrong. What was happening, some of the caves down there, which are below sea level, they saw the drawings and began to see some of these creatures coming from the inner earth down there, and people were beginning to see them. So now they want to flood the whole thing. It's like they flooded the Aswan Dam project, when they had all the Olmec and science and the rest of the we get to see a man and stuff. The teleport right over there runs up. You go down that section. A lot of people have never been to our house, down to the yard and everything else. So if you want to eat outside, it's not so cold today because if you want to go out there, you get to see the yard outside and you get to see a lot of views from around there. So again, we were going to do this before, but they've made so many weather modifications to this summer, but it's not so. Okay. I think in answer to what you said, I believe everything you said there, and in fact, most thoughts that people of spiritual contact get now make sense. Because if you begin to think for yourself and to ask for wisdom and to question, not just for the sake of questioning, but for the sake of thinking that there's an answer, usually what you come up with is the truth, or closer to the truth than either what they give you. Okay, any other questions or comments or sharings?
I just want to briefly say. I just want to briefly comment on the video that you showed about the mounds and of the Native Americans in Ohio and what have you. Well, growing up in Ohio, the 7th grade required us to take Ohio history, and they talked quite a bit about the mounds and the arrowheads and all that in the Ohio history. I don't remember much about it, but I do remember that they talked a lot about it.
Okay. Okay, I didn't have that the last time we met. We did cover the mounds and Cahokia and all like that, so that's why I brought it in now for also tying with the UFOs and something like that. Okay, I'm going to close this one out, if you will. And so let me put my little tag on. For those of you who have bought this tape, purchased this tape, or heard this tape from one of your friends, relatives, or even from one of your enemies, I hope that you'll contact the Metacenter and order it for yourself, if you will.
hard. I'm used to standing. I prefer to stand. It's a point of comfort for me rather than just sitting down and talking. I can't see everybody sitting down, so I stand. I've known Dr. Blair for at least 30 years. I'm a returning student, returning son, returning good friend, returning soul. As he said, I never forgot where I came from, where all the madness began. I used to put my children, which I have 12, to bed many times talking about the classes that we used to have over there. I still remember what was happening on Monday, what was happening on Tuesday, what was happening on Wednesday, Thursday, and then we skipped to Friday and we'd go to Saturday. And Saturday was Super Metaphysics Day, and only a handful of us would come out for that day, and it was madness just to be there, because it was so different than what was going on. The Black Revolution was happening then, and the real one, and not bedazzled kind of, or bamboozled kind of thing like that. They can't even begin to reach into what that was about. They keep trying, but I think the lack of real heart, the lack of wanting to pay the price that might mean your life. I want to use a friend of mine, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, to me the most dynamic Black American woman on the planet right now, because she's all out there by herself. Her mentor, Alvin Toussaint, won't even back her, which I think is very poor on Alvin's part. But Harvard makes you forget all those kinds of things. Any rate, she gave an example. She spoke at DePaul about maybe 8 months ago, and she gave a scenario about a young Black man, about maybe 13, 14 years old. And his mother said, my son is crazy. He's losing it. He's very negative. He doesn't want to deal with anything Black, and he doesn't like associating with his own people. He wears his afro, and he's proud that he's Black, but doesn't talk with anybody, doesn't get with anything. He just keeps to himself. So the mother brought her son to Francis, and Francis talked with the young man, and talked with him, and talked with him. She said that, after I got through talking with him, the basic thing that came out, and I asked him, am I right in assuming this, that you're not involved with any group or any association or anything, and you yourself are not that active on a very visible level, because you're afraid of what will happen to you, because you've seen people who help Black people come to a very ignoble end. And he said, well, I think I understand the word ignoble, but I think you're right. Yes, that's my feeling. She said, well, get up, young man. She went out into the foyer where his mother was. She said, what's wrong with this young man? This young man, he's found the answer. He has found the true answer, which is, if you're really sincere and you get out there, you make it known that you're going to help Black people, expect help to follow quickly. And that's what Dr. Blair was telling you about, the thing setting up. Within 2 or 3 days of presenting the contract, the whole thing got sabotaged. The entire thing got sabotaged. We were right at the point where I was going to bring the contract for him to sign, and another brother I had singled out, and the three of us were going to actually do a series of things. And we may get to that eventually anyway, but I just have to do some other things. Within 2 or 3 days of it being known, the whole thing fell apart. Fell apart completely, and I know DePaul University because I used to be there myself. That's where I got my PhD from, and I taught there for 10 years. And in the 10 years, I was never asked to participate in a single function that had to do with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Black History Month, or Kappa Alpha Fraternity, which I was a very significant part of in the mid-'60s. All the people who knew me, I was the most visible professor, Black, white, or otherwise, because I still had hair on my head, and I still talked a certain way in the classroom. And they all knew who I was, but they wouldn't come and talk to me except to ask me how many white women I had slept with. And when the answer was 0, they had definitely wanted to have nothing to do with me and things of that nature. All that to say that I talked with Dr. Blair about it, and he said, when we talk about truth, it's going to happen to you, and it's true. Everyone I know, not just a few, everyone I know who has stood apart and stood in the clear and open sun to stand for correctness, for absolute truth, and perhaps most of all, for anything positive. I'm not talking about earth-shaking, but of course with us it is earth-shaking. Anything positive that has to do with Black America, and not just Black in the main, but Black America, that catches hell. I brought this book to him because he's responsible for a really part of it, because one of the several sources, the Celtic Druids, Anecdotes, and other books like that, I would never have known about, I don't think, had I not met him. These books are still are not talked about. When I talked to Henry Louis Gates Jr., he never talks about an anacalypsis. When I talked to Alvin Poussin about different problems of psychological nature affecting Black America, he doesn't want to talk about it. When I talk to all these people who are in a position to overnight transform, change, alter, positively impact upon our people, they are silent. And I realize that part of what may be called my problem is that I haven't remained silent. And so I catch it. My phone's been tapped for 30 years. Not to mention, I think I still hold the record in Illinois for resisting the draft. I resisted the draft 28 times. And then finally beat it, and they hate me for that. They locked me up and threw the key away literally for traffic tickets and things like that. My wife came to look for me. Oh, he's long been gone, and no, I was not to say no, you know. And it took her 2 or 3 days to find me, and they were doing things like that to me. So I had to stop driving, so to speak, so that they wouldn't have that excuse to pick me up, because I knew they had my licenses, so that they, any old given thing. So, not to scare you, but to make it crystal clear that you understand what it is that you've jumped into. This is a clear pool of water, but it's loaded with microbes. These microbes are called trouble. And the more you stand, the more you speak to it, the more you get involved with it, even if you're on the fringe. I've tried to pretend like I was on the fringe, but he says, no, you're not. I see you clear. I saw you 30 years ago. You're not on that fringe, you know. So you can wear this bow tie and you can do all that, but I know those turbans you wore and those feathers that you have and those captains and all those sandals and stuff. And I mean, if you didn't wear that, I still know you inside. So you're not hiding from me. So I had to understand that in the most graphic way, which was they tried to kidnap my children to use them for sacrifice and things like that, and I'm serious as a bad tooth about that. My first two, as a matter of fact, they wanted to make sure no more of me came about. Well, the answer is 10 more of me came about, and so so it's auspicious to be back with him. I brought this book for him to see, because it's called Ethiopia and the Flashing Two Beginnings. It's about not only advocating the black man as the progenitor, the starter of life, the cause of life as a species on this earth, but how this thing we call Israel, this thing we call the Jew, this thing we call the Israelite, is about us too. And turning our heads away from this, and it's about this white man over here who Dr. Blair very explicitly gave you a very definitive foundation in terms of their origin. They're masquerading as you and I, and they'll continue to masquerade as you and I as long as we refuse to step up and be who we are. And I heard a woman on the OJ trial say, if you let them, these white folks will steal your ancestry. And that's exactly what they're doing now. They're doing it with unabashedly. They're stealing your ancestry because we will not accept and claim our own. We will not own up. We keep saying if we don't keep making him smile and like us, then he won't let us keep getting public aid and other things like that. Well, he's going to take all that away anyway, and you still will not be owning up to yourself. It's ironic, and so this is the a lot of work, but yet when I did it in like 2 weeks. I'd been thinking about it, I'd been talking to my wife about it for years, and I hadn't done it. And all of a sudden, it just was so strong, I had to do it. And it wasn't anybody pushing me, it wasn't nobody offering me any money to do it. I just had to do it. And like he said, that if you think that his woman is not significant in his life, just listen to her talk. And I smiled broadly about that because I said the same thing about mine. What drew me to her first was not her great beauty, which she does possess, but the fact that she was smart as hell, and because she helped me proofread, and she, and she can show me after the thing, you still did that, you still did that, and I had already outgrown saying, hey, I'm the scholar, stuff like that. No, you don't marry unlike, you marry yourself in a sense, and she, what really drew me to her was that she was very brilliant. She wrote like a graduate student on undergraduate level. I said, I've got to get interested in this, I think. And I waited and I watched, and all of a sudden there it was in front of me, and I said, there you go. And things, and I haven't looked back since. And so I'm just saying that a lot of what he said to you today, I didn't say anything because, first of all, I like to listen. I like to listen to him. When I hadn't seen him in 30 years, and I came about 3 months ago, and we got a couple of tapes. My 2 youngest sons have listened to those tapes at least 15 times apiece. They come to Abba, which is Hebrew for that, Brother Blair tonight, and it's in the cool of the evening. It's never in the middle of the day. It's the cool of the evening. They want to go to bed thinking about this, and I tell you, I don't know what they're dreaming about, but it's like between listening to him and watching the video of the Mahabharata. I don't know which is which, but I'm something inside is very glad it's going on. I'm something inside is very glad that they are recognizing that they belong to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata war. In this book we talk about what was mean to us as a people, how we're not connected to that, how we're not connected to a lot of things because we've let the wrong people steer us in the direction away from ourselves. There's a world thing. There's a Black American thing, and that's very important. And then there's a world thing that we belong to that's even more important. And we won't plug into it until we plug into it. And that's what this is about. It's about plugging into it. And I feel honored that he gave me a platform for a few minutes to say hello to you all and to say that it's out, and I want him, before I put it on the market, which will be very soon, I want him to look through it, give me a critique, and then he's already given me his okay to put his name on it, but I wait till he finishes, then he can say it again. But it's about that because in there are things like, it's even a little quote, it's a small thing, like Stonehenge. We've been told about Celtic Druids and Stonehenge, and we've made that whiter than white. And to be told, to go around and tell other black people, that's you did that. It's to be stoned and chased down the street with torches and kicked it behind, because we don't want to identify with it. No, we can't. I said, you think these castles could be made on cliffs like this with simple, mundane technology? And look at it now. Some of these castles don't have stone. They're monolithic. Do you think the people who couldn't even build a sailboat can build a castle like that? Do you know who you are? You know that the bagpipe is not a Scottish instrument, what it is now, but in the days of Osiris, that was a common thing. The bagpipe is an Egyptian instrument, and blah, blah, blah. And if it's Egyptian, where did they get it? And they would say, well, Egyptians were by themselves. No. Some of us put that together, and then all that, and we have to know that. And when we read about us, when we read the Iliad and the Odyssey, we got to know we're in there too, but we don't. As if somebody goes forth and tells us that we don't want to hear it. So all of a sudden, you have to learn to be patient and keep working on self, because as Brother Blair says, you got to find it here. You got to find it in self. You got to have self-work, because you're not going to find it out there. You can't go forth and say A, B, and C and expect applause, and then say, now I feel good. Because what you're going to get is not applause. And if you don't have some kind of sense of self-worth, some sense of, as he says, a Godhood, then you're just not going to be quiet. You know, because it's not going to happen that way. You're not going to get applause from right here. But there is applause coming. You just are not plugged into it. You know, maybe you are. You know, and that applause is what keeps me going. You know, and it makes my children special to me, and makes all children special. I've always loved children, and I had no idea I was going to have one, let alone what I had. And she keeps telling me there may be more. So I won't argue with that, you know, because keep them coming because I love them, you know. And they haven't, the ones that are in college, they haven't cost me a dime because they're smart enough to be working scholarships and stuff like that. So, you know, that's great. So, and all out of a diet of madness, I call it. But it's a wonderful madness. And I just hope you all could stick with it. And 30 years from now, we can all look back and say, well, I might have been in my first year then, and you were in your 30th, and now you're 60 and I'm 30. Well, it's all the same age at the same point. So I'm glad to be with you all. Thanks all.
Thank you again, Brother Albert. And you can leave it. And still make us about it, too. Because there's a lot going on, and I want to read it quickly, so give it back to you. And you have other copies?
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. And that was an unsolicited testimonial, and he skipped over a lot. His brother's traveled, almost every part of Africa. He's been with Haile Selassie. He's been an advisor to kings, literally. Very modest young man. But again, when you speak metaphysics, and you speak the truth of metaphysics, you go anywhere on this planet, in or out. It's just a matter of understanding who you are. And we come to a time now where you're going to have to understand who you are. Before we feed it, I want to ask a big question of you. I have a part 3 for T, which is again terrestrial, extraterrestrial, and alien. I also have super nano, or nano super science, hidden brains, and a couple others. All are just creators just working through me. The good forces hopefully will continue to use me as a vessel. I want to bring them all to you, but I don't want to bring them to you if you're not going to come out for them or if you feel I've overworked it. And so there are about, and I appreciate all of you who came out today. There are good 12 people not here that should have been here, especially I know 2 couldn't help it. Their jobs sent them out of town, but there are the 10 that should be here. I hope, first of all, that you did enjoy what you heard, or at least but I want to know when to bring either part 3 of T's or to just come something else. If I've overdone it, then we'll stop. There's still a big conclusion that has to be addressed. So how many would want to hear part 3 of T's, first of all? Okay, thank you. That's the testimony. Now, the thing is, do you want to hear it next week, which would be the 30th, or the 7th of July, which of course is right past after all the holidays, the 4th of July, and all like that? And this, based on that, I will set it up again. How many would be able to come out again next week and finish it up at that time? Okay. How many would be able to come out on the 7th and finish it up on that time? Okay. How many would prefer to come out next week on the 7th, and on the 30th, if you had a choice? Let me survive, but I'll use you as a basis for the other. Okay, that's 1.5 people. How many would prefer to come out on the 7th for whatever reason? Okay, we'll do it next week. Sorry about that. We'll have to do it that because there's a lot to give. And fortunately now I'm not dodging anything anymore because the chips are down. Everybody's recorded and known nowadays. And I still want to be what I consider to be the good guys. So it'll be recorded. You can purchase it if you miss it. So it's just a matter of getting it. Like this one is recorded today. It's just a matter of how far do I release it. The only other person, by the way, that could release it would be that brother sitting back there today, Stephen King. So if you see it out, and I tell you I didn't do it, I want you to do that.
No, I'm not going to be the one.
You see what I mean? Some things, you don't say everything you know, and you don't put everything you know on tape. That's a different time. And I'm saying we're coming to a time now where the people that really know that the foolishness is over. So I'd rather be on the side of what I consider the righteous and placated with the enemy who I know is wrong. So we'll do it next week, probably after that, so I can get this off my mind. I'll probably do the super science, because it's just a science that everyone should be able to get into. So if you can tell your friends about it, people that word out that you know, again, we're summating it next week, Saturday, and that's what we'll do. Now, again, while it's still let out fairly decent out, if you'd like to take some of your food in a chair out there in the porch, if you'd like to go down in our yard, if you want to stay up here, whatever you want to do, it's beautiful, and I thank you so much. We do have products for sale, and we still do have